my first interaction at Ahmedabad University, my first public interaction at Ahmedabad University, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful to the School of Arts and Sciences to first give me a home at Ahmedabad University. This is where I live, SAS, and also to address a seminar on a subject that I'm really fresh from, as Marianne kindly mentioned. That, I mean, she said nice things about what I am at Ahmedabad University and what I might do here. But I think for the purpose of this afternoon, I would rather be the guy who's just arrived from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and landed into Ahmedabad. And my apologies, we started a bit late, some technical issues, a bit like the India-Bangladesh relation. So I think it goes with the territory. I think it just sets the tone for our interaction. And I just want to, what I want to do is the way I'd like to keep things chatty, a little conversational, and not pitch it too high, too low, or too sort of presumptuous, but just keep it nice and easy. I hope you interact with me. I hope you bring many questions and clarifications to the conversation that I hope we will have. And this is pretty much a two-way street. This is a bilateral. This is not a unilateral conversation in the spirit of this afternoon seminar. And what I would like to do is to set for you a bit of a landscape, paint a bit of a landscape about India and Bangladesh, which not many people are familiar with beyond 1971, and possibly what they might have been told, or what they might have been, the visuals they might have seen, edited or unedited, raw or cropped, or information or disinformation. And I will try to dispel some of these for you. So I will set a sort of I'll paint a landscape about India and Bangladesh in the context of where we are right now, and also to try and take you to a lived experience, if you will, because I did spend the last almost 3 years in Dhaka and Bangladesh. And right up until when Sheikh Hasina left Bangladesh was compelled to leave Bangladesh, and after that, and also take that experience to what I would call the meltdown and then the fallout of India-Bangladesh relations in the context of the meltdown of Sheikh Hasina's government and the meltdown consequently and subsequently of the India-Bangladesh relations, and try and see where we can recalibrate and where we can take the India-Bangladesh relationship, which has been pretty robust, It's not been all bad. It's been pretty good, even with accusations of India sometimes playing a bit of a Darth Vader role in South Asia. The thing is that many aspects of the India-Bangladesh relationship has actually been very, very promising, very positive, very uplifting, and I think very indicative of what a shared future of peace and prosperity can be. But we're a little bit away from that. So journey with me, ladies and gentlemen, a little. Let me, if it's too light, I could dim can you see the map? I think let's just spend a couple of minutes or maybe 5 minutes absorbing the map. I'm just going to leave the map here. There's no action in the map. On the other hand, there is a heck of a lot of action in the map. And I'm just placing it front and center, Bangladesh, which is the neighborhood of Bangladesh, because here, as much as we're in India, we must necessarily look at India also from the pivot of Bangladesh. Otherwise, it won't make sense. Bilateral relationships or relationships do not make sense unless we see it from both ends of the pivot. So let me place Bangladesh front and center. As you can see, that it is bound by India to its west, north, and east. To the south, it has the Bay of Bengal. And the red line that you see, which looks tiny, but is actually the longest land border in South Asia and among the 5th or 6th largest land borders in the world. This is 4,096 kilometers long. That's a very long border. It is longer than India's border with Pakistan, including the disputed territory. It is longer than India's border with China, including the disputed boundaries. It is, of course, longer than India's border with Nepal and with Bhutan and with Myanmar. So it is the single largest border that India has to deal with at any point of time. Bangladesh and India cannot escape each other. Bangladesh is surrounded by India, and a little twist of fate, and maybe a little twist of partition. You have the state of Tripura, which is also similarly, but in an obverse, surrounded by Bangladesh on 3 sides. And there lies a tail, which we will address a little later. Now, what it does is that if you pay more attention to the map, if you absorb the map a little more, going beyond the India-Bangladesh matrix, you will see that there is Nepal to the left of your screen, and there is a very tiny bit of land, which, I mean, it is at slimmest point, you can see the scale, 200 kilometers there. It is about 22 to 24 kilometers wide. That's called the Chicken's Neck, where it says Darjeeling and Siliguri. So Bangladesh and Nepal are literally 22 kilometers apart at one point. You have Sikkim, then you have Bhutan, and the little sort of dotted line to the left of Bhutan is one of the hotspots of boundary disputes between China and Bhutan. That is Doklam, ladies and gentlemen, where we've had disputes. And a couple of years ago, India actually sent in, through Bhutanese territory, bulldozers to clear Chinese encampments. So it's right there. You have the vast border with Arunachal Pradesh and Tibet. I can't get around to calling it Xinjiang. I keep calling it Tibetan Autonomous Region, and I will continue to do so. Take it or leave it. That's the way I roll. And then you have this vast border with Myanmar. And no, it's because it's just it's all there. So, because I'm not going to get into the minutiae of the locations, it's just a broad sweep, and the border is really the uppermost. And it says Myanmar over there, and to the east of Myanmar, if you can see, this is China, back to China. So this is what I call the geopolitical spot, if you will. And we are obsessed with AFPAC, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India and Kashmir to the north, which is a very sweet geopolitical spot. But this, to my mind, ladies and gentlemen, is an underestimated, often misunderstood, and therefore miscommunicated geopolitical spot. Out of sight, out of mind, we usually don't know about it, connect with it, so on and so forth. Now, very quickly, I just will take you to a historical sweep. Now, as we know, and this is, I think everybody knows here in this room and beyond, that India had a hand in the liberation of East Bengal / East Pakistan, which became the independent country of Bangladesh in 1971. And since then, things have been pretty good most of the time. And it's had some bad patches from about 1975 to about the early 80s, when after Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the first leader of Free Bangladesh, was assassinated in August 1975, up until actually the mid-80s, when the martial law administration sort of ran its course with General Zia, General Ershad, Hussein Mohammad Ershad, and then in the early 90s, 1991 to be precise, you had the onset again of a parliamentary system after several years' gap. There wasn't really a parliamentary system in effect when Sheikh Mujib was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, because he very quickly went into a single party mode. And people say that that's what may have contributed to his assassination in the first place. That's a controversial kind of position, but I like controversy. So bear with me with that. And then you have a situation where India's relationship with Bangladesh has steadily grown. Now, I don't want to get into the various phases of who was prime minister when and who was not prime minister when, who was done out of the politics of Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. These are things perhaps we can keep for another time when we talk about Bangladesh itself rather than India and Bangladesh. But for the moment, what I might say is that when you speed up, if you will, from 0 to 100, 1971 to 100, if you will, in 2024, you have absolutely wonderful things happening in terms of connectivity, which we had actually lost in 1947. Before 1947, there was no border. It was all land. So you could go from Kolkata to Agartala in Tripura in a day. But from 16th of August, 1947, you had to add a 1,100 kilometer detour via North Bengal, Assam, and Meghalaya, and then dip down to southern Assam, and then get into Tripura, Agartala. What has happened, and let me sort of bring it up to what has happened, is that Sheikh Hasina, more than probably any other leader of Bangladesh, has reached out very positively towards India, and India has reached out very positively towards her. India has also reached out very positively to other prime ministers of Bangladesh, including Khaleda Zia, which is usually not well regarded. Now, what happened is that as far as Sheikh Hasina was concerned, she very quickly established her sort of India-friendly credentials, if I may put it that way. She became prime minister in 2001, and then she was away for a few years, and then she came back after a hiatus. And I'm taking you now straight away to the elections of 2008, and she, from 2009 January, when she took office, up until 5th of August 2024, she had an uninterrupted run as Premier of Bangladesh. And that is the crucial era, if you will, of India-Bangladesh relations that we talk about, because it's been over 15 years that we've had an unbroken relationship. Governments in India have changed, but governments in Bangladesh have not changed. It's been steady over there. So she very quickly demonstrated, and there's a reason why I'm saying all this, because it'll help us understand why the meltdown, why the fallout, and why there needs to be a recalibration. So please give me a few minutes to explain this sweep to you. She very quickly demonstrated her worth, if you will, or usefulness, to speak of it in very cynical international relations terms. She handed over, or you can't say it on the record, but I'm not a diplomat, I'm not in government, so I can't say this, that mysteriously, leaders of Manipur rebel groups, leaders of Assamese rebel groups who had been stationed in various places in Dhaka. I've seen their apartments I've myself seen where they lived in Dhaka and in other parts of Bangladesh where they own property, so on and so forth. They mysteriously, or to some of us, not so mysteriously, appeared in places like Kathmandu, appeared in places like Guwahati, after being not so mysteriously led to the border with India. So they were handed over as if immaculately this transfer was conceived. And they sort of popped up near the Indian border, and this sort of decades-long rebellions were diminished, if you will, with these arrests and handing over. And Sheikh Hasina, his government, is responsible for that. And from time to time, she never forgot to remind India, whenever things got a little shirty, things got a little thorny between India and Bangladesh, she would always remind, she would not bring up 1971. Indians tend to do that. Indians tend to use that emotional leverage. Sheikh Hasina would bring up the emotional leverage of, see, I've been helping you all this while. So why don't you go out your way to help us a little bit? A quid pro quo, if you will. So that happened. Gradually, people-to-people movement grew to the extent that at the end of 2023, the Indian High Commission in Bangladesh issued 1.6 million visas to Bangladeshi citizens to visit India, the largest number of any Indian mission anywhere in the world. 3-4 years ago, it went up to 2.3 million. So you had that happening as well. You have the resumption of connectivity between Eastern India and what we today know as Northeastern India. And Sheikh Hasina's, it actually even predates the current government of India. The work for it began in 2005, 2006 with a thermal power plant run by the National Thermal Power Corporation in Agartala, in Tripura over here. And Bangladesh permitted the transshipment of heavy equipment through its territory on ship, on barge, and then over railway to Tripura. And Bangladesh today actually imports power from that very power plant. So it's been a sweet deal, if you will. It's been a win-win all along. And similarly, there's been a transshipment that Bangladesh has permitted, of course, using Bangladeshi transport ships, barges, trains, and trucks, and of course, taking a fee for it. So it's not been entirely in India's favor in that sense. Bangladesh has got something in return. India has pumped in billions of dollars to ramp up Bangladeshi infrastructure for India's own ends. And I'm coming to that in a minute, which is why the map is still there. Because India's outlook for developing this connectivity has, of course, been for its own national interest. We need to understand that. essentially, the map tells you that India needs to sort of bolster the northeastern part of India because China has increasingly been a threat perception for India, growing threat perception for India. So northeastern India had to be the bulwark against China. So India has steadily, over the past 20 years, has been pumping funds into northeastern India, and the transshipment facilities, which go from eastern India to northeastern India, is primarily to help this, the economic activity in northeastern India, but also in a way to help boost that overall thesis that we must make this region strong to keep China out or to keep China at arm's length. That has been the logic. And Myanmar too, there's a 1,800-kilometer long border, a 1,600 odd kilometer long border with Myanmar. And that is also, as you can see, very close to China. So India's been looking at the Myanmar border as well. Okay. So Bangladesh for India has been this great pivot, right? And the other thing that has happened, and this has happened for about the past 15 years, because there are layers to the perception as to why India's gone sort of all in, if you will, with Bangladesh, and how Sheikh Hasina on her part, appears to have gone all in return with India. It's a sort of a church and state relationship, if I may speak loosely about that, because India has another concern about Bangladesh itself, because there has been, and I must take sort of a little blame for this because in 2009, I actually wrote a white paper which got widely circulated in policy circles, which basically posited that Bangladesh being, this entire area being at the sort of the living laboratory, if you will, of the climate crisis. What will happen is that over time, and this is inevitable, it is happening as we speak, as I speak, where 10 million people are already counted as climate refugees in Bangladesh. So what happens, which is why the sea becomes important, the population keeps moving further and further north. So it becomes a pressure cooker situation in Bangladesh. If the pressure cooker bursts, the only way out is everywhere else to other points of the compass. So therefore, all the fancy border fencing that India has put up is meaningless because no power, to my mind, on earth can stop a migratory force which has nothing to do with religion, but is to do with livelihood, pure survival. There's nothing that can stop that movement. That is an inevitability if Bangladesh, which Bangladesh realizes very well, keeps growing socioeconomically. It keeps developing and keeps doing better things for its people. So it has to keep phonetically running in place in order to stanch this future, in order for this future to not come to pass for its own sake. But India sees that, Bhutan sees that, Nepal sees that. And they've always been sort of quite concerned for the last 10 to 15 years that Bangladesh must progress in order, in a way, I'm putting this loosely, in order to protect India. So if Bangladesh implodes, it can take India with it. It can take Northeast with it. It can take Eastern India with it. And if that happens, it's vulnerable geostrategically to China and to any inputs in Myanmar. Now, that has driven over and over again this India's all-in approach towards Bangladesh. And here I will move from the map. But I needed you, ladies and gentlemen, to grasp this. I'm sure many of you know this already, but for those of us who do not, I thought this is necessary. And I just sort of put a few points there, essentially buttressing what I just spoke to you about. It's 1.7 million people, nearly 50% live in slums. A fifth of the population is below the poverty line. Landlessness is increasing. High climate, very high climate exposure risk. 10 million Bangladeshis are already estimated to be climate change refugees. It could go up another 3 million, according to World Bank estimates, in about 10 years or so, if things go really wrong. Urban population in slums is increasing. And so with all these fault lines, imagine a Bangladesh that is frenetically progressing. Its GDP is growing terrifically for the last 10 years, 6% and more a year. at 6% and more a year. It's the second largest garment exporter in the world after China. Its socioeconomic indicators in many levels, as we know well, is ahead of India's, so on and so forth. But it is deeply vulnerable. It remains a deeply vulnerable country because of its geolocation, which is why the map. It all actually comes down to the map in many, many ways. So you have this, and then add on this 15 plus years of a single party, single premier rule, which gets more and more autocratic as we go on. The caretaker government system is abolished. When you criticize, people are put into jail. People are disappeared. There are these infamous rooms called Aina Ghar, the room of mirrors, where thousands of people have simply disappeared who have been released after August 5. So these truths have been there as well. I mean, when I was in Bangladesh and I would write about these things, I couldn't name Sheikh Hasina unless it was in a neutral way. So on 29th of July, when I wrote a column, which was all about hubris and the downside of hubris, I actually used a Harry Potter analogy. And my last sentence of the column was, she who must be named. You know, it was that close, because if I went a little millimetrically this way or that way, I could be targeted. More importantly, my university could be targeted. So you have a situation in these 15 odd years where every bit was micromanaged, right down to how the day of 15th of August 1975, when her parents and 3 of her brothers were assassinated along with dozens of other people, would be commemorated. So we at university would receive how to mourn the day in details, and we had to do it, and the vice chancellor of the university and the registrar and so on and so forth, people had to photographically record it in order and post it on social media in order to prove that we were doing all this. It was micromanaged to that extent. I won't get into more detail, but I'll just stop it here just to give you an idea of where we're going. So you have this sort of tinderbox going, and with this pressure added to economic growth, Russia-Ukraine conflict, vagaries of globalization, so on and so forth, there's been a great pressure on the economy, on the economic system, because through these 15 odd years, you've also had a growing kleptocracy. You've had embezzlement, you have capital flight, which is today estimated at between 93 to $100 billion, a country like Bangladesh. Embezzlement from banks, a handful of banks amounting to about $8 billion, just banks, right? So imagine the effect, and therefore you print money. You have showcase projects which help the country, which the Padma Setu, the Padma Bridge, which has done great things for Bangladesh, but it has pauperized part of the population because you're printing money in order to fund the projects. It is a simple inflationary economics. So when you have this thing, food inflation is high, budgets are destroyed, there's stress in politics. Increasingly, 2008, she was elected, but the elections of 2014, 2019, and the last ones concluded in 2029 January were sham elections, where essentially her party, and that's it, because the main opposition party, BNP or the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, didn't fight the elections, right? And I have, and it was, even though they were the single largest party, and in the National Assembly of 350, where 300 are directly elected, regularly Awami League would win 225, 250, close to 260 on one occasion. And yet they would indulge in ballot stuffing. This is proven. I asked a student of mine about if he had gone and voted. So he said, in Bangla, I said first, "Haan sir, khub bhalo bhabe vote korechi. I really voted well. আমি তো 7-8 বার vote দিয়ে দিয়েছি. I voted 7 or 8 times." You know, so that was the level of that. I mean, that's been the level of sort of public participation, if you will, or the pretense of public participation. And the whole world has rung alarm bells, except for India. India has stood by Sheikh Hasina, the great friend of India. And there's a reason why I'm saying this. For national interest purposes, very, very old calculation. Only the calculation began to go south with an undoing initiated, as it happens, by Sheikh Hasina herself. And that's where I take you next. You know, I was talking about conflict issues in my class and political economy and religion and partition. It just didn't make any sense. And soon we were in this calendar. This is a calendar that I have in school where you can see that all of July has got the red circle. That means when the killings began on 15th of July and the trigger was on 14th of July, which I will explain, the whole month was washed away with no classes. We were banned from holding classes. We were banned from holding online classes because the students would talk. Classes stopped. High school, primary school, college, inter-college, university, research institutions, everything. Bangladesh educationally came to a standstill for a month. Tellingly, this is actually what the calendar ended up looking like. And I'm just sort of, I'll flash back a little bit, but I just want to show you how my calendar to the actual students' calendar or the calendar of protest looked like, which began with the protest in early July, the first person to be killed by the police in broad daylight on live television, live streamed on Facebook was Abu Said, and then it just blew up. And then it ended on 5th of August, or 4th of August, which they called 5th of August, which they called the 35th of July, because they took a vow, the student demonstrators, they took a vow that July would not end until Sheikh Hasina left. She left on 5th of August, so that counts as 35th of July. So it became the longest month ever in literally in Bangladesh's history. Now, when it basically began with in late June, early July, when a quota system, which gave an inordinate proportion of government jobs to not just the children of freedom fighters of 71, but also the grandchildren of freedom fighters of 1971. So, which added up with other benefits to about 55, close to 60% of the 100% government pie. So this becomes crucial because when you have a university system, and we are familiar with this, which leads more to unemployability, and you have economic pressures, you have political pressures, then it creates a pressure system. It creates sort of a situation for a perfect storm, which was just about to erupt, if you will. So what the students of the public universities of Bangladesh, beginning with Dhaka University, where all the action begins, it's Dhaka University, Chittagong University, Sylhet University, Rajshahi University, and wham, across Bangladesh. That's how it happened in 71 and happened this time as well. And what they did was that the government, the court of Bangladesh, the High Court of Bangladesh, actually brought back the quota system on an appeal, which was very political because by then the institutions had been suborned to such an extent that nobody really bought the idea that it was all very simple, it was all very innocent. It was clearly a political ploy for the Awami League party, of which Sheikh Hasina was the head, to gather public support among its echo chamber, among its chosen. Only with all the political economy issues and the pressures that are coming around, the students of public universities, and that speaks to the weakness, if you will, of the education system as well, where for jobs, you look to the government and government quotas to protect the job. So when that 100% got crunched between 55 and 60, the students who were not part of the quota began to protest. And the protest kept escalating. And what it did is that the goon squad of the Awami League, the Chhatra League, the youth, the students wing, and the youth wing of the Awami League, they have complete control of the public university, or had, let me correct myself very quickly, had a complete stranglehold of the public university system. So they control the residences, which are called halls in Bangladesh. They control the unions, they control everything. So the Chhatra League and the Jubo League goon squads, if you will, went into the universities and started threatening and beating people up. You can't get a seat in a hall unless you're cleared by the league. And you have to usually become a member of the league to get a seat in the hall. So to get a seat in a room in a hostel, they have to clear it. It was that endemic, that rampant, the command and control system. So Of course, there was a pushback because it had all come to this situation of a perfect storm, and it began to trigger students. And around the 14th of July, Sheikh Hasina made one of several cardinal errors. She just stepped right into it, where on live television, she was asked, about the quota issue. So she said in Bangla, you can correct me, I think I'm just a word or two off, saying, look, quota মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের ছেলে মেয়েদের দেবো নাকি রাজাকারের ছেলে মেয়েদের দেবো? So shall I not give the quota or the reservation to the children and grandchildren of the freedom fighters? Am I going to give it to the children and grandchildren of the Razakars? Razakars were, as you might know, in 1971, they aided the Pakistan army commit the genocide in 1971. So what happened is that it absolutely triggered a backlash in the university. So within that evening, we were getting slogans, the slogans had changed to Amike, Tumike, Razakar, Razakar. So these were people, ironically, who were of the families of freedom fighters, who took up this chant of we are Razakars, because they were just so angry that how dare you call us children of Razakars, because it's a huge insult in Bangladesh to be called so. And that was 14th of July. 15th of July, I go to my class, and my students, my classes that day, literature and conflict studies class, my students are on fire, literally. And I said, okay, my course is called Living with Conflict. Let's talk about what's happening around us. And we said, we will track this as it happens, and as long as it happens, this will be your Living with Conflict course. Forget what we mapped earlier. Forget all that. Let's just go with this context. My South Asian literature class, I said, forget what we talked about before. We'll talk about Rushdie, we'll talk about Arundhati Roy, we'll talk about, Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, whatever you want, Muhammad Hanif, everything. Forget them for now. Let's talk about protest literature. So my whole compass changed. That was the last class we had, ladies and gentlemen, till August. That's when it ended. 16th of July.
But the students who are descendants of the freedom fighters, they were members of the Awami, the Chhatra League, or that must have been much bigger than this.
Yes, the Chhatra League was way bigger than just the children of freedom fighters. The Chhatra League is essentially a co-opting of creating, if you will, a mechanism, sort of a grassroots mechanism. So you're sort of a perpetual motion machine, if you will, where you create in perpetuity a system where you keep getting recruits into the Awami League through the system, which our Indian political parties also have. It's a similar mechanism. Only here, like West Bengal with the Trinamool Congress and Communist Party, and also Congress in the past, been sort of what I would call mastanocracy-led. It's been a system of mastanocracy rather than a democracy, if you will. They built up this sort of very hard-handed, heavy-handed system. So that's how it happened. So all through this, the Chhatra League, Jubo League kept beating, they actually were beating students. So what happened is that the students came out, and I'm sorry if this is a bit small, but you will see that largely women in this photograph. Women have been at the forefront of what is called the Monsoon Revolution right through. And 15th, this happened. 16th, Abu Said, the gentleman in the calendar who I pointed out on 16th of July, he was shot. And the Chhatra League, and by then the police had jumped in, and they were in concert with the Awami League councillors and the students, leaders, and so on and so forth. And they were in packs attacking students at various universities as a group. 16th of July, Abu Said gets shot dead. The private university students join force with the public universities. And that, I think, really turned the equation completely. Where I was teaching at a private university, but our students also were protesting outside the gates. Many were also beaten up by Awami League councillors, police, and Chhatra League thugs in concert. So people have been beaten up. I paid for the treatment of some students who were like a fragment in their lung. All kinds of things have happened, bullet fragment. These things have happened. Private universities joined in. And that's the second slide that you see. And and the amazing part of this is that it was all playing out live. It was all playing out real time. These posts say 5 days and 5 hours, but this was happening within minutes. It was being uploaded. And the government hadn't yet shut down the internet. So this was it was truly going viral. And Shafiqul Alam, who's now the press advisor to Muhammad Yunus, who's the chief advisor to the interim government of Bangladesh, Shafiq Bhai, who's saying, he just posted saying, it's like a premonition, what's going on? Because you knew something was about to burst. And he was on the ball. And then Black University, there's a very prestigious university in Dhaka. So they were being attacked, and the universities in the vicinity, East West University, Canadian University of Bangladesh, North South University, American University of Bangladesh, International University of Bangladesh, they all came together in concert. So it was like, it was sort of a student protest in real time through social media, WhatsApp groups, all kinds of things was happening. So this is also a very meme-driven talk in a way, because I wanted to capture for you a different language, if you will, a different vocabulary of protest, which we sometimes do not understand because it's done by people who are much younger than us, of a different generation and attitude and approach altogether. So this happens, and the storm is gathering. And so when I was talking about the Chhatra League, they actually went into, this is a bit of a retrospective, they went into one of the halls and they recovered these choppers that the Chhatra League and the Jubo League were using as this was part of the arsenal. They also had hockey sticks, iron rods, and helmets were part of the standard issue combat gear for the Awami League superstructure. This 16th of July, SUST is the Shah Jalal University of Science and Technology in Sylhet. It's being attacked by the police and by the paramilitary under direct orders of the government of Bangladesh at the time, Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina, the most reliable friend of India. And I'm going to keep saying this over and over again because I need you to absorb this as well, because that is part of my thesis. So there's this this keeps rolling. This was standard. Plainclothes, Awami League, and/or plainclothes police beating up people, two ladies in this instance, students. This is a photographer who just photographed that gentleman at the back being injured, and he died subsequently. This was happening. And again, the more people were being beaten up, the more people were being killed, the more the outrage grew, right? Students, July 16. This is over July 15 and July 16, where people were just being attacked by police and Awami League goons. And, these are your regular college-going students. You can walk around at Ahmedabad University and you'll see people dressed like this. And these are the people who are being attacked and hunted down, systematically hunted down, systemically and systematically both. This began to happen. A dead person, a student with a band on his forehead with the Bangladesh flag green with the red splotch, just being carted on a rickshaw. I visited hospitals, literally blood on the floor. And there's a in Bangla, it's called a Pongu Hashpatal, where it's for people who have lost limbs. And if you went there were literally limbs around. I have avoided deliberately, I'm not going to show you those images. You can search them yourselves. But this was just the sanitized version of the chaos that was unfolding, a sort of a structured chaos, if you will, the pushback. It's a live fire. Young people who are not college students began to be killed. 16-year-old high school student. This is his aunt with a post. This is my Farhan Fayaz. He's dead now. I want justice. Outrage grew. 201,000 angry, tearful signs, more than 100,000 shares. And it went on and on and on. The people wanted accountability. This began to happen. Ahad was for was in a window watching where police shot at because they were spraying bullets everywhere. He got shot in his eye, a bullet got stuck in his head. Ria, 6 years old, was on a rooftop playing. The Bangladesh government sent out army choppers and they were shooting from the choppers. She died. So you had Hussein and Samir and Mubarak and Taimid and Naima and Ifat. I think we should take these names. And if you just do a Google search saying student deaths in Bangladesh 2024, do it in your own time, because this is not really what my talk is about, but I need to establish this in order to establish where we go from here. You'll find legions of photographs and evidences. And what happened because of the social media, and by then Facebook was banned, but everyone had switched to VPN. So the postings were happened, and Kadruddin Shishir, who's an editor with AFP, Agence France Presse in Dhaka, fact checker, he would edit and he collected geolocated photos. This is Abu Said, who just stood saying, shoot me, and this gentleman did. And it was live. So, I mean, he poses that the gentleman with the AK-47, and he's not with the police, but he's with the Bangladesh border guards, BGB, border guards Bangladesh. He's firing an AK-47 at essentially 150 meters or so into the crowd. So this was happening in Dhaka, in Chittagong, in Sylhet, in Rajshahi. The movement and the reaction and the pushback spread across Bangladesh. This was not isolated in Dhaka. You had these iconic photos, this stitch of a girl would stand, this was her Tiananmen Square moment, where she would stand in front of this riot, police packed with students, and she wouldn't leave till she got her colleague out of the van. And I believe, because I've been in these sticky situations before, if that day you didn't have the TV cameras, she might have been killed. I don't know, I'm just sort of speculating. Maybe I'm dramatizing it, but I think I need to. Lawyers stepped in and they were pulling students out of the detention vans. So the government was actively seen to be hunting down protesters at this point in time. Well, please watch this. Go away with him. This was happening over and over again. And so there was a passion, there was this rage that saying, this is it. We have to do something about it. This emotion, ladies and gentlemen, is very important to understand. And soon you had this happening. This is a graffiti in Jahangirnagar University, which is a very well-known university in Dhaka. In Bangla, it's a Deshta Karo Baperna, because Sheikh Hasina, this is not your father's, this country is not your father's. So the reference is to Sheikh Mujib, because Sheikh Hasina would continually hammer away. There was Mujib everywhere that you went, on currency notes, in airports, in posters, in statues. And then she would, like, Tere baap ka hai? Exactly, the counter punch. Deshta karo baperna, and that became the slogan, along with Amike, Tumike, Razaka, Deshta karo baperna, Deshta karo. You can go to YouTube and get these sort of sloganeering happening. And you had these people who were outraged with the children being killed. This happened outside my house in the main road, where on a rainy day, students, teachers, university professors, painters, musicians, parents, aunts, uncles would come out and they would protest. And of course, the gentleman in the Spider-Man mask is one from my former university. So I'm quite proud of that. He's got a ULAB tag over there. So he's there in Dhaka University Student Centers. So at the university, we were very proud of this boy. We don't know who it is. The students refused to share his name with us. Good for them. And then the memes changed, and Sheikh Hasina began to be equated with Yahya Khan. You see? And then the students, the student body, the student people, the student leaders, who until then had 9 demands. They had a 9-point demand, and the government was talking to them, because they had no choice by them. The demand was that all these killings that have happened, by then several hundred dead, several thousand injured, several hundred amputated in various ways, hurt, injured, whatever, that you must be accountable. Those who are committing these crimes, the minister, home minister, information minister, defense minister, everybody would have to be judged for their crimes. They have to resign, so on and so forth. Charter of 9. The more this happened, the demand went from 9 to 1. That's the Bengali 1. The 1 point demand was Hasina must go. It went from 9 that we want justice on these lines. You release all those who were arrested, etc., 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 to Hasina must go. It then became a 1 point demand. And in a way, 1 is greater than 9 because you have these graffiti again near my house. Ek dafa, ek dabi, Hasina tui kobe jabi. 1 demand, when will you leave? It doesn't rhyme quite well in my instant translation, a very poor one, I admit. But this one you can hear, and you can read homeland or death. I mean, where were we? We were in the capital of Bangladesh, Chrome and glass, Concord, talking about the future of prosperity and so on and so forth. Posh house, nobody cared. 1 literally became greater than 9 in front of our eyes within days. And this is a slightly long clip, but I just want to show you a minute or so of it, just to give you the impact. And this is happening on 2nd of August, 3rd of August, where in what is called the Shohid Minar or the Shahid Minar, which is a memorial of 71, which is almost a sacred, not almost, it is a sacred commemorative location for people in Bangladesh. I just want to give you a sense of, despite the crackdown, and by then the army was on the streets. 18th July night, the curfew was declared, army was on the streets, and yet, and that is another significant aspect, because the police were killing, the Awami League goons were killing, the border guards Bangladesh were killing, their version of the CISF, which is called the Ansar, were killing, plainclothes were killing, the Rapid Action Battalion were killing, their SWAT teams were killing, but the army didn't kill. And that is significant. And just bear with me for a minute. I think it's
অভিভাবকদের বিক্ষোভ মিছিলগুলো একে একে জমায়েত হয় সেখানে। দুপুরের পর রাজধানীর বিভিন্ন স্থান থেকে মিছিল নিয়ে শিক্ষার্থী, শিক্ষক, অভিভাবক, বিভিন্ন সামাজিক, সাংস্কৃতিক আর পেশাজীবী সংগঠনগুলো সমবেত হয় শহীদ মিনারে। সব মিলিয়ে বিভিন্ন শ্রেণী পেশা ও বয়সী মানুষের সমাগমে জনসমুদ্রে পরিণত হয় আশপাশের এলাকা।
যত দূর চোখ যায় মানুষ আর মানুষ, কে শিক্ষার্থী, কে অভিভাবক, কে পেশাজীবী, চেনা দায়। সবার গন্তব্য রক্ত দিয়ে কেনা স্বাধীন বাংলাদেশের ভিত্তিমূল কেন্দ্রীয় শহীদ মিনার। সেই উদ্বেলিত ছাত্র জনতার কণ্ঠে নানা স্লোগান, মুষ্টিবদ্ধ হাতে হাজারো কণ্ঠে দীপ্ত প্রতিবাদ। এত মানুষ মরল কেন?
আমি আমার শহীদ ভাইদের বিচার চাইতে আসছি।
এটা হবে, তারপরে তো মানুষজন বাসায় যাবে, তার আগ পর্যন্ত তো মানুষ বাসায় যাবে।
রক্তের উপর বসে, এত শহীদের উপর বসে আমরা কোনো আলোচনা মানব না।
বৈষম্য বিরোধী ছাত্র আন্দোলনের পূর্ব ঘোষিত কর্মসূচিতে যোগ দিতে রাজধানীর বিভিন্ন প্রান্ত থেকে দলে দলে মিছিল আসতে থাকে সকাল থেকে।
This is second, and you have this iconic photo of the rickshawala saluting the students who were gathering in Dhaka. So these are, I'm just showing you some images to demonstrate just how widespread the support for the protest was and how widespread the opposition to the Awami League government became. It is important to understand that. And 3rd of August, 2 days before she leaves, she announces the doors of Gonabhavan, like people's house where she lived, are open. Too late. By then, nobody's interested in talking. So they gave a call on the 3rd of August, saying that on 5th of August, long march to Dhaka. Everybody from all across Bangladesh would converge on Dhaka to the Prime Minister's residence and the National Assembly, which is the Gonabhavan. And Amra Ashti, we're coming. And they announced it. And significantly, on 5th of August, the army, with their armored personnel carriers, these are painted white because Bangladesh goes on a lot of UN missions, United Nations missions. So these armored personnel carriers are deployed on United Nations missions. So the army, which was on the streets, and these are killer vehicles, literally, they stood aside and they let the people converge. And then Waqaruzzaman, the chief of the army staff, who is sort of a distant relation of Sheikh Hasina, his father-in-law married one of Sheikh Mujib's cousins. It's like a convoluted relationship. Basically said, "Madam, time to go." She wanted to she wanted to sort of address the nation. They said nothing doing. She was gone. She flew from her residence to the local Air Force base, Army Aviation Base, hopped onto Hercules 130CJ, and arrived at Hindon Air Base not too long after, received very significantly by Ajit Doval, India's national security advisor, photographs of it on TV, beamed live all over, including Bangladesh. They basically put the two and two together. So what, and this is the crux, what Bangladeshis were then convinced of, and they knew this for a while, is that India is complicit in the crimes committed by Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League. That's where the association came. And that was how the meltdown of the India-Bangladesh relations truly began to happen, because people of Bangladesh, who were part of those 1.6 million people who got the visa to come to India, were now saying, "Damn you, India. How could you do this? How could you stand by and see this happening?" Until the last day that she left, saying that Sheikh Hasina is our friend. So India was seen as being complicit. And 890 dead so far, missing 11,000, injured 33,000. They're still collating the confirmation data on this. So India was seen as complicit in all of this. India was seen as complicit in all of this, sort of even burnt down, they destroyed the Indian Cultural Center, Indira Gandhi Cultural Center in Dhanmondi, where I lived, which was the former High Commission premises. They just attacked it. And that is one of the reasons why the government of India, High Commission of India, has reduced its personnel to 10% of staff strength, have stopped issuing visas almost completely, except for medical emergencies and for students with urgent needs. Nobody else, no tourist visas, complete shutdown, because the embassy premises or the government premises of India were attacked, right? And they even burned down the house number 32 in Dhanmondi, which is the residence of the Mujib family, where Mujib and his wife and three of their sons were assassinated, which became a national monument, if you will. They burned that down. That was the rage, that the founding father of Bangladesh was himself defiled by the actions of his very own daughter, who lived off her father's memory. It's a very messy situation. And I was talking, this is just a proof of concept, as we like to say, where a Bangladeshi paper saying 92,000 odd crores of taka being embezzled by banks, that's about 8 billion US. The taka's depreciated very rapidly in the past 2 months. And Sheikh Hasina's son, Sajib Wazir, who lives in Washington, DC, runs a multi-billion-dollar trust empire, actually saying things like India should ensure that there are elections in Bangladesh. I mean, these were just adding to the fire of anti-Indian sentiment, you see? And then there was a Washington Post story, which the last line is, the truth is, the whole thing just needed a spark to set the whole house on fire. We calculated that she had full control over the administrative and coercive arms of state. We thought repeated attempts to destabilize the government have failed, so she will manage again. No. So India, official India, completely misread the situation on the ground. And I've been screaming from the rooftops, figuratively, for the last 2 years, saying recalibrate, 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 to the extent that I became persona non grata at the High Commission of India in Dhaka. They stopped inviting me to their functions. But it's a price I'm happy to pay, because at least we flagged it. And then there were floods immediately after. India was blamed for deliberately flooding Bangladesh. There were huge floods. I mean, there were rains in Eastern India, Northeast India in August, second, third week of August. And these are Photoshopped, these are fake pictures, but nobody cared. They were sharing them. India was doing it. That says, we have to combat India's conspiracy to, India has created the flood so that they can kill many more, thousands more Bangladeshi people. This PAC media cell is an out and out ultra-conservative, semi-extremist organization which deals entirely in misinformation. Both these, this is misrepresented and this is a photoshopped image, it's a fake image. But nobody cared. The Indian anti-India sentiment went viral. They said boycott Indian products. There were memes saying, will I ever visit India again? You need to understand where we're coming from. And so the downsides, and here I'll just wrap up, and I did begin late, a little late, so do permit me another 5 minutes. I'm going to move quickly on this. So the way I see as the downsides for India, and please keep the map in mind when we consider this, that of course this the poor optics. And one of the reasons of poor optics is that people keep complaining that India is taking advantage of Bangladesh because of its trade deficit. There are $12 billion of Indian goods coming into Bangladesh, only $2 billion of Bangladeshi goods coming into India. Nobody talks about $24 billion of Chinese imports into Bangladesh and less than $2 billion of Bangladeshi exports into China. So China's trade surplus with Bangladesh, China's exports into Bangladesh, trump India's by 10 billion US, but you will not hear a murmur about China in Bangladesh. Not a murmur. Chinese banks and state institutions hold the greatest number of private debt in Bangladesh. Not a murmur. China has set up a submarine base north of a very lovely sea resort called Cox's Bazar in a place called Pekwa, which can berth 6 submarines and 8 warships. And it's called BNS Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh naval ship, as they say, INS Sheikh Hasina. I mean, the name hasn't been changed yet. I'm sure it will sooner than later. But these things are happening. 60 to 65% of Bangladesh's defense needs are met by China. Not a murmur. Not a murmur about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Not a murmur about anything. Optics. China is very good at optics, extremely good at optics. India was left flat-footed with its optics because of its presumptions, sort of bilateral presumptions. So, people to contact is reduced. China's, trade has diminished. China's influence is clearly on the upswing because they're not in a negative sphere. There is a lot of vulnerability in the Teesta Basin because China has actually offered, again, the map becomes important, the chicken's neck, the 22-kilometer chicken neck, because to the east of that is the Teesta Basin. And China, Bangladesh has always accused India of not either letting enough water in or letting too much water in, which has led to hydrological issues, farm production issues in Bangladesh. So China, a couple of years ago, very smartly, I thought, stepped in and said, oh, we will develop this whole zone for you. We will pump in several $1 billion and we will rejuvenate the Teesta Basin for you. And that's when India stepped in. And in May, the foreign secretary at the time, Mr. Quatra, and now there's a new foreign secretary, Mr. Mishri, Vikram Mishri, Mr. Quatra flew to Dhaka and made a counter proposal for India, saying, no, forget China, we will develop the Teesta Basin for you. Too late. So now the new government, the interim government, has said, forget it. We will renegotiate every deal that the previous government has signed. And there's a deepening conservatism in Bangladesh. The flip side of Awami League was through a hammer fist. They managed to keep the extremist forces in Bangladesh, or the extremist influence in Bangladesh, through any means whatsoever, including incarceration, tortures, disappearances, beatings, jails, false cases, everything, at bay. Now, with Hasina gone, one of the first things that the interim government did to demonstrate its democratic credentials is to release all the political prisoners, including all the extremists. All, bar none. They're all out. All of them are out. And there's an opaque governance in Bangladesh. So who do you deal with? Right now, with the interim government, we don't know what's going on there. Who is pulling the strings? What about the army? No one's talking about the army. The army was crucial in this victory of the student protests and the student movement. But nobody's talking about the army right now, which in a way, ladies and gentlemen, resembles the PLA in China. They are a business. They are an enterprise as much as the defense and offensive forces of the country. So the Bangladesh army bottles mineral water. They import sugar. They run hotels. So does the Air Force and the Navy. If you go to Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh Navy has a terrific guest house, one of the best. And you can get liquor there as well, which you can't get in many places in Bangladesh. I thought I should make that point, especially as we are in Gujarat. It's a persistent problem that I face anyway. And I'm trying to crack that code off the record, naturally. And so right now, if you want to go India's way, so there is this opacity, not just affects India. So who do we deal with? But it also affects Bangladeshis. They don't know who they're dealing with because there's a revenge attack happening in Bangladesh right now, where all the Awami League people are being attacked. Anyone associated with the previous government are either losing their jobs, including 70 vice chancellors and pro-vice chancellors of public universities. They were forced to resign. Students barged in and said, resign, you were the killers, you were complicit. Where were you when we were being beaten up and killed? So you have an education system in complete meltdown. So imagine trying to fill 70 VCs and pro-VCs. So Bangladesh is right now in a chaotic situation. For weeks, there was no police. So students were controlling traffic. And for a change, the traffic in Bangladesh was orderly. Because nobody would mess with the student. They'd kicked out a prime minister. So when the student says, you follow the lane protocol, you damn well follow the lane protocol. So students have been empowered in the strangest of ways, wonderful ways and also very disturbing ways, because this is chaos. It's anarchy. It's nihilism plus anarchy plus dreams and aspiration. And right now it's a vacuum. Therefore, minorities have been attacked. You've heard stories of Hindus being attacked, Buddhists being attacked, Christians being attacked. True stories, but not to the extent that they were made out to be by misinformationistas in India, if I may call them that. But there are upsides too, because the thing is that nothing has come to a screeching halt. So even if it seems like things have come to a screeching halt, things haven't really. So commodity exports have continued. Bangladesh is yesterday given clearance to import 40 million eggs because food prices are up. Onions are being imported, tomatoes being imported to mitigate inflation. Electricity exports are continuing. Bangladesh imports 2,600 megawatts of electricity from India, including the Adani plant in Jharkhand, 1,600 megawatts of that. And just a couple of weeks ago, India signed a trilateral treaty with Nepal and Bangladesh, where they allowed, on an experimental basis, the export of 40 megawatts of Nepali electricity to Bangladesh via Indian transmission lines. So things haven't, borders have reopened. There is less people movement, but goods are moving. Goods haven't stopped. And on 21st, Royal Enfield opened its showroom in Bangladesh, and they've opened the manufacturing assembly facility in Bangladesh, east of Dhaka, for assembling 30,000 Royal Enfield motorbikes a year. And this happened in the meltdown as we speak. So I just put it for fun over there because they actually, they booked out, they sold out. Today's the 23rd, 21st, it opened in 2 days, they sold out the first stock. So anti-India, yes, but there seems to be a feeling that, let's work over this, make nice, play nice, be nice, make up, say sorry. Show us that you are sorry, you're contrite. Show us your contrition. There seems to be this feeling, which is very important. And also, ladies and gentlemen, that policymakers don't think emotionally. People do, you and I might, but policymakers do not. They think very clinically, systematically. So policy is ongoing. I'm coming to the end of it. Possible ways ahead, engage with all stakeholders, not just a monolithic party, which we have made a similar mistake in Myanmar as well, but dealing only with the military junta, the Tatmadaw, and the SAC, which is the State Advisory Committee. Resume issuing of visas, initiate bilateral, trilateral water conversations, like the Mekong Commission. There's something that I've been pushing for a long time, that Because Ganga, for instance, is not just an India-Bangladesh issue, it's a Nepal-India-Bangladesh issue. The Brahmaputra is a China-India-Bangladesh issue. Brahmaputra, of course, a trivia, is the only transgender river in the world, as you might know. It becomes Jamuna as it enters Bangladesh. So it goes from Brahmaputra to Jamuna. Just a little trivia for the GK bucks over here. And prevent religion and community-specific anti-Bangladesh rhetoric by our senior government officials. I'm very keen to see what the Home Minister of India says tomorrow when he visits the border of India and Bangladesh in Petrapur to open some customs facilities and border facilities. I believe, given some of the rhetoric that we've heard in the past month or so, which has been quite anti-Bangladesh, I think it has happened before as well. There will be placatory messages announced tomorrow. At least I'm hoping for that as a bilateralist, if you will. And, sort of reduce tariffs, so on and so forth. Once emotion reduces, work on the practical aspects. Bangladesh, and something maybe at Ahmedabad University we might look at, is a huge opportunity for edutech, finance tech, fintech. They're looking for startup money, angel investing from India, because they see the saturation in Silicon Valley, America, North America, and Europe. So they've been trying to pitch to Indian angel investors, saying, come to Bangladesh because our sectors are growing. We need to diversify from government exports to other areas. And ITES is one of them. So come and help us. So there are many, many, many opportunities of interaction. And so it's a lot more than just 4,096 kilometers. It's a heck of a lot more. Thank you very much. And I know we came in a bit late on this, but I'm all yours for anything at all. I can see Nilanjan already there with
Questions again.
No, please don't do this. Yes, please. That absolutely destroys me, this, because I mean, if you do wish to destroy me, that's the way to go ahead. Kind of yes. But my replies will be necessarily brief, I promise you.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Later.
So one question directly about foreign policy. So the country that very obviously recalibrated in time is the US, right? Vis-a-vis Sheikh Hasina, right? So my question is sort of twofold. To what extent do you have some sense of the Bangladeshi view towards the US in light of the position it took just a couple of years ago vis-a-vis Sheikh Hasina? And also in terms of the India-Bangladesh relationship, given that the US and India are cozying up, do you have some sense of what role the US plays vis-a-vis China and India and so on and so forth? The other completely unrelated question, but you mentioned, so part of what happens when something like Sheikh Hasina has to move out is you have a wholesale replacement, for instance, of vice chancellors and universities, so on and so forth. Entire government, right. We have a similar kind of totalitarian-esque strategy that has shown up in some parts of India, certainly in universities, right, where vice chancellors and so on, systematic, not to anywhere the same extent. My question is there any way that you can see of avoiding that kind of wholesale change when this kind of regime changes happen? Is there a simpler way of making a transition?
Okay, so to answer your last question first, there is no way to avoid this because there is wholesale change. It's a fait accompli. One has to now deal with it. So about can it be avoided? Too late. It began, that's the sequence that I ran you through. And as in India, we're quite fond of chronology. I thought I should establish chronology in a somewhat emphatic manner so that we could come to terms with what follows in the present and in the future. So it's too late. There is wholesale change. It's something that one has to live with and deal with. Bangladesh is first, Bangladesh first, and then anyone else who wants to engage with Bangladesh, including India, US, and China itself. So they are as much dealing with the vacuum and the chaos that every person Bangladesh is dealing with, from Mohammed Yunus downwards, right down to the unforgotten fishermen in the Bay of Bengal. They're all dealing with this grand chaos and grand vacuum. It is he became the chief advisor to the interim government on 8th of August. We are today on 23rd of October, not quite 3 months. After this massive change, completely dislocating change. But as far as the US is concerned, I don't think they're quite recalibrated, because the US, as we know, or any country, and national interests vary from time to time. National interests, I don't need to tell this August audience, is entirely expediency-led, right? We mustn't also forget that Sheikh Hasina's sister, Sheikh Rehana, Sheikh Hasina's own son, Sajib Wazir Joy, is, as we speak, in Washington, D.C. And being called upon by Bangladeshis to account for the disappeared tens of billions of dollars from the coffers of Bangladesh. And he's in Washington, D.C. America is not about to kick him out. China has kept it very, very, very quiet, and I think quite practically so. India has made an outreach. So I think this recalibration will keep happening. And there was a second thing that you said, which I missed. See, this is what happens when there are too many questions. So therefore the Quad, I mean, again, you answered your own question. India is very much a part of Quad, and yet it is in Kazan today, and yet Prime Minister Modi is going to be meeting with President Xi Jinping today in Kazan, as I think sometime now, if you're not wrong, because he's arrived at the palace in Kazan already. So this is international relations, as we know very well, is a shape-shifting creature. Nothing is constant. So calibration and recalibration is the lifeblood of diplomacy and international relations, geopolitics, and most certainly geoeconomics. There's a lot of money to be made in Bangladesh. There are contracts to be filled. There is money to be made in Myanmar. There's money to be made in Nepal. There's money to be made for everybody all around, and at the same time, press for influence in the region, Bay of Bengal and the greater region. So nothing is ended, and everything is shape-shifting even as we speak. Nothing at all is ended. And I think we'll just go back to, there's no status quo ante over here. So we'll just have to work with new games and new plays and new realities, and how now everyone can adjust to the new realities. I hope, being a citizen of India, that India plays smart this time around. Please.
So, I'm curious about what has happened to the young people who led this revolution. It's been so spontaneous at a time when we think young people all across the world are sort of apolitical. They're really concerned about whether their degrees are going to get jobs, and that's what this rage was about as well. In fact, there are many parallels to the condition of young people in India with high levels of unemployment and all of this. So, was this a moment of politicization for these youth? Did it come from certain earlier forms of politicization of young people? Or was this just a product of this moment? Will it disappear? Will it fizzle out? What are these young people doing today?
I think that's an excellent question, and thank you for asking that. I was hoping to trigger that question in a way, so thank you. I think what the older people, if I may call them that, the boomers and those even more senior than boomers, those who are not boomers will understand what I'm saying, if I may say so. I think they completely misjudged the students. They misjudged the youngsters, because they just assumed that there was a bunch of youngsters who were so much in a moral stupor, that is one of my pet phrases, and so much driven to the mobile phone and the apps that they had absolutely no connection with what was going on around them. This proved that that was incorrect. So while they had their aspirations, and while they wanted the green card, and while they wanted this, and while they wanted that, everything that any sort of 2024 student or youngster will want in South Asia, if you will, broadly speaking, they were watching what was going on. For many of them, Sheikh Hasina is the only prime minister that they've ever seen in their sort of political consciousness. So they've also not had a comparison They've only seen this one person saying Mujib, 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 Bongo Bangabandhu, the friend of Bengal. She was referred to as Bangabandhu Konna, Honorable Prime Minister Bangabandhu Konna Sheikh Hasina. Bangabandhu Konna means the daughter of Bangabandhu. So there was this formation and creation of a cult in front of their eyes. And there was a sort of appropriation of their civic rights, their citizens' rights, the democratic rights, the constitutional rights by this one person and her family and her crony and the entire assembly and the bureaucracy and the armed forces of Bangladesh. So they were enraged by that. And I think when they found, and that was the surprise, that I was tracking comments and observations from older people, relatively older people, and they said, my God, first surprise, the students of private universities have joined common cause with the students of public universities. They came together on the streets together to defend each other, fight for each other, stand by each other. So students of private universities have also been killed and tortured and arrested and lost their limbs, and many lost their minds. So there was a assumption that, and I think that was a miscalculation on the part of the government as well. Not just the older people of Bangladesh misread the students, the government of Bangladesh misread the students. Over and over, I heard this refrain, it needn't have come to this. It needn't have come to this. This was a refrain in English and in Bangla over and over again. So I think the government misjudged it. They really couldn't gauge the outrage. And when it came, they pushed back in the only way they knew how, with violence. And that triggered a counter reaction. And as you saw, it kept escalating to a point when Sheikh Hasina had to leave. As for, excuse me, as a psychological makeup of the students is concerned, they're destroyed. I mean, there's a bunch of students who are enraged and emotionally spent. So I'll give you my example. When we resumed classes on 18th of July, 18th of August, and by then I had left Bangladesh, I was in my home in Goa. I was taking online classes because students just refused to come to campus. They couldn't deal with the trauma of coming to campus. And not just at my former university, but across Bangladesh. They are now open. Classes have resumed. They had an orientation for the fall semester at university. All that has happened. But I can tell you, for the first week to 2 weeks, I was not their instructor or their professor. I was their counselor. So there were people breaking down all the time. There were people, boys and girls, unashamedly crying in our Zoom, in our Google Classroom interactions. It was bad. It was really, really bad. We opened counseling lines. We pooled together resources. There were hotlines that we went out and talked to psychologists and psychiatrists. And there was not just in my former university, but all across Dhaka and Bangladesh, there were these sort of damage control exercises. And I use the word damage very, very advisedly. These are destroyed children because their colleagues have been attacked and killed. They've seen people like them being mistreated in the vilest possible way. So they carry a lot of anger, immense amount of anger. So for that anger to be leached away, I'm not sure treatment is going to cut it. I think it will take several years for this negative energy to dissipate. But they're hopeful, they're young, so they're resilient. And I'm hopeful for them. And if anybody resuscitates Bangladesh, it will be the same people, I think, to my mind, who created the change in the first place, or so I hope. Sorry.
Thank you for the students.
Thank you.
The comparison might not be correct, but I couldn't help but think of the anti-Mandel Commission protests that happened in India. And there also, I mean, like you point out, women were at the forefront, the general category, quote unquote, women were at the forefront of those protests as well. And it also brought down the government. I want to tell us a little bit about the specificity of the quota in Bangladesh. If you please.
Okay, so it's like, I mean, that was a trigger, but as like, and thank you, I mean, like the Mandel episode, it sort of, it just needed that spark because there were a lot of others. So the 55% of 100% of government jobs were reserved for largely for the children and grandchildren of what are called Mukti Jodhas, the freedom fighters. Some percentage of the 55 were accorded to the minorities, specifically the indigenous people of Bangladesh, who we can even have a separate seminar on, because like in India, in India's Northeast and Central India, they're the forgotten lot. They're completely undiscussed and unheralded lot of people. For instance, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. So they had a little bit of reservation, marginal. And women had reservation. There were some reservation for women, but that was not, even within that quota system, it wasn't sort of, if I may use a contradiction in terms, it wasn't merit-based, if you get my meaning. It was a patronage-based quota system. So you had quotas, and then to be affected by the quota or to benefit from the quota, it would help if you had Awami League lineage, or you had a membership in the Awami League or in the Jubo League or the Chhatro League. Then the jobs, even within the quota system, would be then more enabled. So the government trying to redress that by, again, pressuring the court to reduce the quotas, but it came too late. It came when the outrage had crossed all limits. And the government tried to backpedal by saying, oh, we've reconsidered your demands, and we've agreed to your demands, that only 5% of the 100 will now be accorded to the children and grandchildren of the Mukti Jodhas, the freedom fighters, because after all, they gave their lives for the nation, right? So we have to respect that, but only 5%. See, and they completely took away the women's reservation. They reduced the indigenous people reservation, and these are in many ways necessary reservations, right? So they, in their backpedaling, they trashed all of that as well. They erased those, if we might call them necessary reservations, sort of affirmative action reservations, affirmative action slots, if you will. Everything got pushed back to that 5%. By then, hundreds were killed. And nobody was in a mood to go and talk to the government to take up this new quota, because things had gone beyond the quota by then. It had become a 1 point, as we saw, Hasina must go. It all happened way too late. So that was the kind of the quota dynamic, if you will. So, sorry, so just want to hand over.
Sheikh Hasina is gone, the government is gone, but a lot of people were part of also perpetrating this kind of violent killer and discipline movement.
Indeed.
So that in this aftermath, when students are also traumatized, etc., but there must also be a lot of resentment against police action.
There is.
So what those people who are part of the ruling machinery, I know some of them go into hiding or whatever, but
And many have come to India, by the way.
like every people like that who would have been part of that area where this violence is taking place. What about them?
Okay, that's so they are now being the rehabilitation or the acceptance is slow. So one of the telling things that happened in Dhaka and the bigger cities, but in a few places, the police in like Shahbag or near the Shahid Minar, they were actually policemen and policewomen both actually doing the Arab Spring thing, or the Hong Kong thing. By that I mean they were giving out roses and tube roses to students in Dhaka University, near Dhaka University. So they, within several days, so within for the first 4 or 5 days, there was not a single policeman or policewoman on the streets of Bangladesh, because they were the evil empire as far as the students were concerned. And more than 40 policemen were lynched across Bangladesh. They lost their lives because many were just strung up. Some were burnt, some were chopped to death, hacked to death. So there's a slow recovery. The interim government have reached out to the police representatives across Bangladesh, in Dhaka and other big cities and smaller towns, the rural police, for instance. And there is dialogue happening saying, we assure you that, there will not be retribution because we need law and order. When there was none. So that dialogue is happening, but we're not even in the 3rd month. We're literally coming to the end of the 3rd month now. So there's a long process. I don't think that law and order will be back to normal, even though there is no normal anymore. It might take another half a year before any semblance of what we think to be law and order will return across Bangladesh. It's most visible in Dhaka, And then, of course, Chittagong, Sylhet, the bigger cities first, and then Rajshahi, Bogra, other places, Tangail, Sari place, and so on and so forth. So, thank you. I was waiting for that. So, and very, very briefly, because that again needs its own seminar probably. A very disturbing thing happened, but an inevitable thing happened to my mind and to everybody's mind. When the violence began to peak, the anti-student violence began to peak 18th July, 19th July, 20th July, 21st July, then suddenly, or not quite suddenly, there was this sort of parallel group of people who were clearly not students, who would, in almost as if they had rehearsed it, they would pop out of these neighborhoods, attack a police post, burn it, disappear. They would come in hundreds in a place like Mohakali, attack the expressway booths, the toll collection booths, burn it down, disappear. They burned down a metro station in Mirpur 10, the Mirpur 10 metro station. So these were not students. And the student representatives were saying, we are not them. And the government announced on live TV, including Sheikh Hasina, you can fact check me on this, and many other ministers saying, these are not students. So they're students. Weirdly enough, ironically, got legitimacy for their protest by the government itself differentiating these extremist protesters from the student protesters. I mean, it was the most bizarre thing that happened. But that was also disturbing because what happened is that there is an element called the Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh and the Chhatro Shibir, and there are very many disturbing, ultra-conservative, completely extremist organizations in Bangladesh, like in many parts of South Asia, across religions. And they came to the fore because they could, because there was chaos, because there was anarchy, because there was protest, because the students were being shot at. So they came out and added another layer to the protest, which had the result of the state ratcheting up its own response as a sort of a broad spectrum killing, shooting, firing. Then it didn't really care who it was hitting out against, as long as it was seen to be against Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League or the government structure. But the army stayed quiet through all this. And I cannot stress, ladies and gentlemen, the importance of the army in Bangladesh's structure through this so-called monsoon revolution, and most definitely in the future, because my call, and you can call me out on this a year later maybe, is that if Bangladesh doesn't recover from its anarchy, I think the army would definitely step in. And then our friends in India, China, and America would say, oh yes, Bangladesh needs some stability because the region needs stability, and they might recalibrate their approaches all over again, shape-shifting reality of geopolitics and politics. So,
probably it's too early to ask a question like this at this stage in which Bangladesh is still reorganizing itself as a nation, and both internally and externally, I'd say. I wanted to ask, what do you think would be the future trajectory of the way that in the way in which Bangladesh pursues its foreign relations? Because
foreign relations.
yeah,
Okay.
because while internal politics may come to a standstill, or there may be some movement which is not very much in tandem with what used to happen earlier, there is always this scene of international politics moving on in the background. And Bangladesh was not just any other nation in South Asia. It was a key member of an organization such as BIMSTEC, for example.
It remains a key member.
It remains one. And that's what I wanted to know. How does this new interim government headed by Honorable Muhammad Yunus.
Let's dispense with the tag. I mean, that's a problem to begin with. When you become honorable and then extra honorable, and then it's a short and slippery slope to becoming dishonorable, as we've just seen and heard. But thank you. Short answer: no change at all. That's the thing, because policy continues unless there is a mindset that is so radically different in terms of where Bangladesh needs to be. Policy doesn't change. So the interim government, in terms of Bangladesh's trajectory and Bangladesh's blueprint for itself, they agree with the Sheikh Hasina government and Awami League. They agree with the BNP, the Jatiya Party, the army. They're all in agreement, plus minus a few degrees of difference, as to where Bangladesh needs to be in order to remain, for there to remain a country called Bangladesh, which is viable and not a failed state. So there is an agreement on that. And that has ensured that, as we saw, that interactions with India have continued, even though there is public outrage and very terrible optics. Outreach with China is happening as we speak. Sheikh Hasina's son continues to remain in Washington, D.C. There's no problem with that. There has been no recalling of ambassadors from any capital in the country, in the world, unless they're Awami League appointees, political appointees, who've been recalled, which are for domestic political reasons, but not for international relations. That's a different, like what's happening between India and Canada. That has not happened. That India and Canada have recalled each other's envoys. That has not taken place in Bangladesh's case. If envoys have been recalled, they've been recalled because they're identified with Sheikh Hasina and as being political appointees of what they call a killer regime. But the policies have not changed. Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, was in Bangladesh last week, speaking to his good friend, Muhammad Yunus. They talked about they've had bilateral discussions. So very likely, Bangladesh will gain more employment in Malaysia for Bangladeshi expatriate workers. There will be trade, there will be investment. But one pitch that Muhammad Yunus made to Malaysia, as he's made stridently, is for the Malaysia's help in repatriation of Rohingya refugees will fall on utterly deaf ears, because Malaysia is a part of ASEAN. And ASEAN does not consider the Rohingya, they don't even use the word Rohingya in any official communique in ASEAN. In any official communique, they never have. They call Bengalis in ASEAN. So Muhammad Yunus might get benefit for Bangladeshi workers and trade and investment, but there'll be zero, to my estimation, support for Bangladesh's pitch for the Rohingya issue, which was the same response that ASEAN had, that India had, that China has towards the Rohingya issue, because India and China have their geostrategic interests in Myanmar. So countries play international relations in this particular way. This is national interest in a, depending on which nation's interest you're looking at. Again, short point, there's been no change in approach. Bangladesh is very good at reaching out to all countries. They're not really part of any bloc. Like Nepal, like Sri Lanka, they have worked with the sort of the superpower rhythm, if you will. Nepal between China and India, Sri Lanka, China, India, so too Bangladesh, China, India, and in this particular case, America too, European Union too, and ASEAN. So it's the same, but different, as they say in Thailand.
We can make Kasturi's question the last question.
I'm here all day if you want.
The rest of the conversation over
but,
time.
Right. So I have two questions. Can I go ahead with so I remember a few years ago, there were protests again by students, but a lot of other people against Razakars, right? They were, the Jamaat, the leaders who were released by the Supreme Court and during the International Crimes Tribunal in Bangladesh. And so the Shahbag protests were against Razakars. So from that point to now, where students are saying we are Razakars, do you think, in your observation, do you think they spoke out of frustration and anger to subvert it, or were they also
Absolutely.
done-
They were reacting to Sheikh Hasina's statement, who
Right.
basically accused them of being Razakars, little less than Razakars. So they said, you want to call us Razakars? Fine, we'll call ourselves Razakars. They did that in anger. So there's no link
Okay.
between that Razakar and the students saying, you want to call us Razakars? Go ahead. We'll be Razakars if you
So
want.
Jamaat-e-Islami's involvement in the recent protest did not grant any kind of legitimacy to it then?
I'm not sure I would use either. I would not use legitimacy as a description. The Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh was actually declared a sort of a party non grata on 1st of August, as recently as 1st of August 2024. What you're talking about, the Shahbag movement and so on and so forth, where many people like Ghulam Azam and other
Right.
leaders of the sort of the Razakars of the era and the people who were indicted by the International Crimes Tribunal, who's also now looking out to get Sheikh Hasina back. Irony, because she's the one who set it up
Right.
to punish people of 71. The ICT, essentially, the students came out when they felt that the punishments that were meted out, the penalties that were meted out to these criminals or genocidal sort of perpetrators of 1971 was too lenient. So they came out on the streets asking for harsher penalty, after which they reconsidered the judgments and they actually gave death penalties to many people. 12, if I'm not wrong, or 13 people were executed after the Shahbag movement. The Shahbag movement was an outrage of the government of the day, Sheikh Hasina's government, as it happened, being too lenient with people who were seen as being criminals of genocide or guilty of genocide in 1971. So that's a very different thing. So students have come out from time to time, including even 3 years later, when the bloggers, secular bloggers and Hindu bloggers and atheistic Muslim bloggers, irrespective of gender, were being attacked and chopped and hacked to death in the streets of Dhaka and Chittagong and Sylhet. Students came out in support of that as well. Students have traditionally been a motive force in Bangladesh, as it happened before 1971. The whole Bhasha Andolan, the language movement, which began in the 50s, was greatly carried by the students.
But
And
this-
in 70
these are unrelated.
No, these are unrelated.
Okay.
This is a storm which is of its own making. It is not related to the Shahbag 2505 storm or 6 storm or 2008 storm or the 2015 storm. This is the 2024 storm, which has its own dynamics and outcomes.
Yeah, and the other question was that given Sheikh Hasina's close relationship with India, did India have a choice not to provide asylum to her? And so what could India have done differently in terms of optics that you spoke about?
Well, I've just spent the last hour and a half talking about India, what India could have done. But thank you for making me underscore the point. I think what India could have done very differently was that it just went all in with Awami League and Sheikh Hasina. It didn't talk to. It's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. I'm just being a bit facetious because I've been on my feet for a while. It's just that. I think there was I even called it in one of the columns I wrote, I called it the Indian zamindari. It was almost like a zamindari attitude that I felt that Indian foreign policy establishment had towards Bangladesh and other countries of South Asia, where we decided that it was good for India, but we forget that when you take that line, it doesn't become a bilateral relationship, it becomes a unilateral relationship. As far as the people of that particular country are concerned, as we learned in Nepal and as we had learned in Maldives not too long ago. Same happened in Bangladesh. I saw for the past 2 years, think tank heads would fly into Dhaka. Delhi was a very busy route, 7 non-stop flights a day, by the way, from Delhi alone. They would fly into Dhaka, not engage with any civil society people or NGOs or analysts or policymakers or think tanks or academics for that matter, would go straight into the Prime Minister's office and talk to the top officials of the Prime Minister's office and fly back to Delhi. That was the access. That became the echo chamber. And that was realized when the meltdown happened. And I played that quote for you from the Washington Post story. I could have played quotes from you from several of my stories, but I didn't because of conflict of interest. My columns and essays and analytical reports. So I think they didn't see the writing on the wall, or if they did, they decided that she would ride it out, Sheikh Hasina would ride it out, and therefore India would ride it out on her shoulders, as it were, and would protect India's national interest via Sheikh Hasina instead of engaging Bangladesh, which China has done with better optics. China is seen to engage with the people of Bangladesh and not just the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. India was seen to engage only with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh and not the people of Bangladesh. India could have done this better. And I'm happy to say that very quickly after August 5, you had missions, if you will, missions of remission and contrition in some way, going to Malé, going to Colombo, going to Kathmandu, high-level foreign ministry missions, not yet in Dhaka, because it's too charged right now. I expect there will be a peace mission to Dhaka in a couple of months, maybe when the temperatures cool a little more. So outreach, optics, gestures like we outlined, saying what is the future path. I think India needs to be seen to take some leads and initiatives. And in turn, India can demand, yeah, you must look after minorities. You must protect the border. You must do sanctity of this, sanctity of that. Absolutely, of the treaties, of payments for electricity, everything. In turn, India being the zamindar, after all, surely can give a few breaks in the revenue collection for the year, to use a medieval or modern Indian revenue collection phrase, analogy. So I think India needs to be a little generous and use that generosity in practical ways in order to reach out to Bangladesh and to be seen to reach out to Bangladesh. India needs to demonstrate. Until it does, the distrust won't diminish. That is my take. 1.6 million people. But stop tourist visas completely. Now, but that is one aspect. Even so, that is my point. So even with the 1.6 million visas, India still had horrible optics. Last point to buttress this, India donated 20 locomotives, diesel locomotives to Bangladesh last year. Okay, it was on a direct request by the government of Bangladesh. 20 locomotives came to Bangladesh because India is reducing its dependence on diesel locomotives. We're going electric largely. When they arrived, optics in Bangladesh was India calls itself a friend of Bangladesh. They're sending us second-hand diesel locomotives. My take would be that you've got 20 functional, very well-functioning locomotives. Take it, because you need rolling stock. You've asked for it. But the spin has always been that India can do more. It's not doing enough. India's taking people for granted. India is using Bangladeshi territory and not giving enough into Bangladesh in return. Even though statistically it can be proven to be completely incorrect, because the roads that are India's building, waterways that it's amping up, railway tracks that it's renovating are today Bangladeshi assets, right? So if Indian goods are transshipping or exporting into Bangladesh through the same connectivity, Bangladesh can export out. It follows, because they are now Bangladeshi assets. Even so, the optics is so poor that you will see Bangladeshis or businessmen who should know better. I've heard it from businessmen and chambers of commerce heads saying India can do so much more. I'm saying it's doing a lot. So I think attitude is a key thing. Speech, what you say and what you do, and you have to publicize that. India, I think, took itself for granted in Bangladesh. China has never done that.